Hi, my name is Jared Hokut, and I wanted to record a short video that shows how to subscribe your OpenShift 4 clusters. Things are done a bit differently in OpenShift 4 than what you may be used to if you have an OpenShift 3 cluster, so I wanted to show what that new process looks like. The first part of the puzzle here is going to be OpenShift Cluster Manager, or sometimes abbreviated as OCM. You can access the OpenShift Cluster Manager by going to cloud.redhat.com, and you can see here right in the middle, click on Cluster Manager. Now, if you wanted a direct link to this, of course, it's just cloud.redhat.com/OpenShift. Once you log in to OpenShift Cluster Manager, you should see the list of clusters that you have deployed. Now, in my case here, you'll see that I have 2 clusters that I've deployed. And in both cases, because they are brand new clusters, I have not subscribed them yet. They get created and attached with a 60-day evaluation subscription. And that's essentially what we want to change here to attach our actual subscriptions to. Now, what you'll notice here is there are UUIDs listed here for the name. And the way that we can figure out which of these UUIDs belong to which cluster is by looking at the cluster itself. So if I go look at my first cluster here on the main page right after I log in, this is just the overview page, you'll notice that I have this cluster ID right here. I even have a convenient link to OpenShift Cluster Manager there as well in case I need it. Now, in some cases, especially if this is a process you're looking to automate, you can also get this information by using the CLI, and you would do that by running OC get cluster version and extracting the cluster ID. Of course, you could just list that entire artifact and go look in there as well. But if we run that, you'll see here as well, we get that same cluster ID. Now, what I want to do is I now know that this cluster, so the one that begins with 00B, is the first cluster that I'm looking to register. And so if I come back over to OpenShift Cluster Manager here, I can find the first one right here. And I'll go ahead and click on that, and you'll see in a banner right here at the top, it is also letting me know that I have an evaluation subscription attached to this and is asking me to go ahead and edit those subscription settings. Now I can also scroll down on this page to the subscription settings section and click the edit subscription settings as well. Either one of those links take you to the same place. Now, once I click that link, it gives me a short form here that I need to fill out. The purpose of this form is to tell OpenShift Cluster Manager how this cluster should be supported and which subscriptions are going to need to be attached to it. Now, in my case, the subscriptions that I have are standard support, so I'm going to choose standard here. In my case, this is also just a dev test cluster. These are subscriptions from Red Hat, so as instructed here, I'm going to leave option 3 as is at L1 through L3. And then for option 4, you'll notice that this box here is telling me the number of compute cores that are going to be required to subscribe this cluster. Now, when I hovered over with my mouse here, you'll notice that this is not an editable field. And that is because OpenShift itself is actually reporting this information to OpenShift Cluster Manager for me. And we'll show an example here in a minute where that number automatically updates itself as you scale out the cluster. So for option 4, I will also leave it at its default. Now, when I click Save Settings, that is going to set these options for this particular cluster. And at this point, OpenShift Cluster Manager will communicate with access.redhat.com to ensure that this cluster now shows up in my inventory for me to be able to attach subscriptions to. Now, before we go do that, let me go ahead and actually look at the second cluster as well. So just to verify, I will go to the interface of cluster 2 and verify the cluster ID here. We'll see this one starts with 745. And if we come back to OpenShift Cluster Manager and click on clusters, we'll see 745 here as well. We'll go ahead and click that and perform the same activity. So I'll say edit subscription settings. I have standard subscriptions. This is a dev test cluster. But in this case, for option number 4, you'll notice that it says 9. And that's because in this case, this particular cluster, I added some additional worker nodes to scale out the cluster just to demonstrate that this information does get reported by itself. So we'll go ahead and save those settings as well. to ensure that both of these clusters have been configured to show up now in access.redhat.com. So let's go take a look over there. And so now when we look at this page, you'll notice that we have two systems here, and the IDs should match those UUIDs that we see in OpenShift Cluster Manager. This is a bit different than what you may be used to in OpenShift 3, where in OpenShift 3, you would see each individual node that makes up the cluster listed here under systems, and you would attach the subscriptions to those individual nodes. With OpenShift 4, these are now listed as a single cluster, shows up as a single system. So there's a one-to-one mapping here. Now, if we take a look at the first cluster that we have here, so the one that starts with 00B, we can click on there, and as sort of already indicated here with the red square, this cluster is not yet subscribed, and we can verify that here. Now, just to validate the information that we have, if we come look under System Facts, we'll see that it does list those 3 CPUs that need to be covered, and that's translated to 3 cores. Here it does call it CPU sockets, but that's what that means. And so in that case, let's go look at our subscriptions so that we can attach the correct subscriptions. Now, under subscriptions, we're going to have 2 options here. We're going to have the ability to pick what subscriptions we'd like to attach, or let the system figure this out for us. To start with, let's go ahead and show the more manual way to do this by attaching the subscriptions ourselves. So we'll click on that, and let's go ahead and filter this list by OpenShift. And if we scroll down here, I'm going to use these OpenShift Container Platform standard subscriptions that cover 2 cores. And in this case, if you recall, we have 3 cores that need to be covered. So that's going to require 2 of these subscriptions. So we'll go ahead and select that, drop down to 2, put a check in the box here. And if we scroll down, we can click to attach subscriptions. Now, once this page comes back up, we'll notice a nice little green dot here. And of course, if we come under the Details tab, we will see that our cluster is now properly subscribed. And as indicated right there, that is now true. So let's take a look at our other cluster to show what happens when you do have additional worker nodes attached. So we'll go back to the Systems tab here. And in this list, of course, we'll see the cluster that we just chose to subscribe, showing with a nice green circle. But our second cluster here, we've not yet done that with. So let's go ahead and click on that one as well. And again, we'll also verify by looking under System Facts that the numbers we're expecting to see do match. So again, in this case, we do see the 9 sockets listed here, right? That 9 comes from OpenShift Cluster Manager, just like we saw before. So we'll go under subscriptions and we'll do the same thing, except this time we're going to be a little bit lazier, and we're just going to go ahead and click to run auto attach and let the system figure it out for us. And of course, it'll do the same thing. And as you can see, it chose the same subscriptions that we had. And in this case, we needed 5 2-core subscriptions to cover the 9 cores that we have. And again, just to validate, we'll go back under here under Details and validate that it does show as properly subscribed. And as we can see here, that is true. Now, one thing that of course can become difficult, especially as you have more and more OpenShift clusters, is trying to keep up with the names here, because these UUIDs are not necessarily human friendly. So one thing we can do here is if we come back over to OpenShift Cluster Manager, and I'm going to go back to my list of clusters, is I have the option to rename these. So if I click the 3 dots over here on the right hand side, I can choose to edit the display name. Now 00B in my case was cluster 1, so that's what I'm going to name it. And I'm going to go ahead and click to edit that name. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other cluster. So let's go ahead and edit that name. We'll call that one cluster 2. And what will happen is now that we've made that change here, if we come back over to access.redhat.com, let's go ahead and refresh this page. We should see those names reflected here as well. So this makes it much easier for us to figure out which clusters we're referring to here without always having to reference the UUIDs.